Everyone, welcome. And please, as you come in, please let us know where you're tuning in from, what brought you here today, and we can get the program started in a minute or so as soon as we get all the participants into the room. We're about halfway there. Are very much encouraged to chat have a conversation in the chat. Yeah, let us know where you're tuning in from, what brought you here. We're all here for in the time of our history, and we are really excited for this program. Let a couple more people in here. It's like we have someone from Annapolis and Bethesda, Trumbull. From right here in Hartford. Great. Like the numbers are slowing down, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Oh, it looks like we have some from London. I'll be in London in August. First time in London, second time in the UK, but first time in London. Last time I was just in Scotland. San Jose. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum here in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm delighted to host today's program in the time of our history. Our virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring the late Frank Lord. We are happy to honor his memory with these programs. We really are. And we are also incredibly grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting all of our virtual programs. Now let me tell you more about today's program. We are welcoming Susanne Pari and Kamin Mohammadi for a discussion of Susanne's book, In the Time of Our History. This new novel explores the entangled lives within an Iranian American family in the 1990s. Our author, Susanne Pari, is an Iranian American novelist, journalist, essayist, and book reviewer. Her first novel, The Fortune Catcher, has been translated into 6 languages, and her nonfiction writing has appeared in the New York Times Sunday Magazine, the Christian Science Monitor, the Boston Globe, and many other publications. A former program director for Book Expo, she is a member of the National Book Critics Circle, the Authors Guild, the San Francisco Writers Grotto, and the Castro Writers Cooperative. She serves on the board of the Lakota Children's Enrichment Writing Project and is an alumna of the Hedgebrook Writing Residency. She blogs occasionally for the Center for Iranian Diaspora Studies. Kamin Mohammadi is an author, journalist, broadcaster, public speaker, teacher, and cultural curator. She is a prolific journalist and writer who has written for the British, Italian, and international press, including The Times, The Financial Times, The Guardian, and many other publications. She has also co-authored The Lonely Planet Guide to Iran and numerous other travel guidebooks. Her journalism has been nominated for an Amnesty Human Rights in Journalism Award in the United Kingdom and for a National Magazine Award in the Best Essay category by the American Society of Magazine Editors right here in the United States. Kamin has authored 2 books, Bella Figura, How to Live, Love, and Eat the Italian Way, and The Cypress Tree, a love letter to Iran. We encourage you to have a conversation in the chat, as I said earlier. If you have any specific question, you can post that directly into our Q&A section. You can do that at any time, as soon as you think of it. Put in the Q&A, you don't have to wait until the last minute. And please also know that you can click on live transcript to see live auto captioning of this event. I will be putting a link in the chat to purchase In the Time of Our History. There's the book again. Right there, sort of disappearing. And you could purchase that through our museum store, which will help the museum as well as Susanne. Now, please sit back and enjoy, and I will hand this over to Susanne and Kamin.
Thank you so much, Omar.
Can you see me? Oh, there I am.
There you are.
Hi, Kamin June. How are you?
Hi, Susanne June. I'm well, thanks. How are you?
I'm okay. It's early here and late there.
Yeah, you're having your cup of tea, and I'm well gonna have an aperitivo after this.
Oh, sounds good to me. Sounds good to me.
It's an absolute thrill to be here, and it's a thrill to meet you. And I just want to tell everybody, just show again to our audience your beautiful, beautiful new book, that it's been my pleasure to dive into and read and immerse myself in, in order, to really absorb it in order to talk to you today. And it really has been a pleasure. And thank you, Omar, for, the introduction, because I think, as an Iranian who grew up, in Britain, Susanne and I, we share a lot. We have a lot in common. So to also have a book that deals with the kind of experience that I had growing up, it's been a privilege and a pleasure, because this sort of literature has not been available for people like us, or was not available to me when I was growing up, and for that I also want to thank you, Susanne June, because representation, right, is so important, to be able to see ourselves and recognize things. So I think this novel is not only brilliant, it's an important book in so many ways, so many reasons.
Can I just cut in for a second and show your memoir, okay? Because I did not know about this memoir until Omar engaged you to interview me, and I wish I'd had it as a reference when I was writing my book, because so much of what you write in The Cypress Tree in this memoir would have been helpful to me when I was writing mine, because you were in Iran at the time that I was writing about, and I was unable to be there. So I highly recommend it, Cypress Tree.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You know what, Susanne, I wanted to ask you actually about why you set the book where you did. But before we go there, let me just very quickly, Omar has already introduced you to the book. I wanted just to give a little addition to that. I think it was the Lit Hub review that said this, and I really liked it because it sums it up so well. This is a transnational, multi-generational narrative of grief and loss, cut by interludes that recall Persian storytelling. I want us to talk about this too. And it's a portrait of family secrets, betrayals, and most of all, sustaining love. So this is a very, very rich and beautiful book. To call it a family saga seems almost incorrect to me, although of course what you do is you take us into this amazing family and you absolutely immerse us in it. But this isn't a linear narrative of various generations. This is a narrative which occupies a particular moment in time, but it stretches, in richness, because actually through this narrative, we learn so much about Iran, the history, the modern history of Iran through your characters, and also the experience of diaspora. And there is more than one experience of exile and diaspora, and you go into this beautifully in here. So thank you, Susanne.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, can I ask you, first of all, I know that you published a novel before, and that you...
Long ago.
So shall we just first dive into what brought you to this story? How did the story come alive in you? What inspired it? And what made you write it? I mean, I know from my own experience, to write a book that is so rich, it's a labor of love. It's a Herculean undertaking and a task. So I'm curious to know how your process was.
So I think I always want to write books or to tell stories whether I'm telling myself these stories and dreaming them up myself, or whether I'm writing them down, for me, strong women and how to be a strong woman is really the most important theme in my life. And so since I write fiction, I tend to write characters that I would like to be like, and that I'm not like. So in a way, that is always my thrust when I'm writing stories. It really is a women's issue. How do women find the strength to be independent, to have self-determination, and also, but at the same time, to still have love and family, and because love and family are the most important things to me. And I think to a lot of Iranians, family is just is the pinnacle, or it's the central part of our lives. But the construct, the traditional construct of the family, is problematic for women, to put it mildly. So I think it was a matter of, the storytelling is a way for me to examine all of this and to explore options. So that's how it started for me.
Thank you. And you know what, as we said before, there are so many themes in this book, grief, trauma, loss, displacement, identity, but really this thing of femininity and rebellious women. We have rebellious women that woven through this book, and actually so many of the characters, some of the characters who don't seem to be rebellious women, but they have this journey which makes them examine their roles and sort of become that. So I said this to you before, I feel that this book, beyond everything else, is about women, and it's really a tribute, also to women and all the different ways in which you can be a woman, or women have to identify or make or be themselves in order to fit into all of these different roles. And as soon, of course, as you bring in the Iranian nature of the family, then that becomes even more complicated, I suppose. So Mitra, who is your protagonist, I guess I would say. So we have this wonderful family. We have this, the family, the Jahani family. Now, I wanted to ask you about their name, actually, Susanne. Did you choose Jahani because
yes,
well,
yes, I definitely did that. I wanted to reference. I mean, it means the world, Jahan, and so I chose that because it fit with my idea of how I am in the world. I don't feel like I'm one thing or one nationality or one culture. I just feel like and I think that it's really important for all of us, no matter what our backgrounds are, for all of us to be cognizant of the globe and of the histories that have happened and are happening, and how they feed on each other and reflect one another. And if we do that, then we'll be more prepared to deal with our own situations on the national and local level. So so that, yes, I have this problem. I wouldn't call it a problem, but because I'm Iranian, metaphor is everywhere. So yes, I named them Jahani because of the word Jahan. Yeah,
I love that. I love that. And I also exactly this idea of the global nature of it, the transnational, I suppose, comes into this book. And I, of course, really related to that, where you're telling us not just what's happening in that moment in America or in Iran, but you're placing the story all the way along by what different events in the world, particularly through the interludes. And perhaps, Susanne, John, people like us whose lives have been made and shaped by politics and historical events, maybe we don't have the luxury of ignoring what's going on in the world, right? But I
Yes.
think I love that that came in, because I really related to how you placed, you know, your characters within what was happening around them globally, because of course it feeds in.
Yes, it does. And that was so important. The interludes allowed me to do that. And I didn't realize that, I mean, they occurred to me very sort of naturally in a flow state. I did not expect those words to come out of me, and those interludes. They're very short, but they came to me very late in the process, and they tied the whole novel together, and they helped me understand, they helped me explain how I view the world, which is not from the point of view of just what's happening in America or in Europe or whatever. Yeah.
In fact, this whole global kind of spectrum. Let's talk about the interludes since we're here quickly. In fact, so the novel is punctuated, I would say, by these interludes, which are very well. The best way, I think, is for you maybe to read us one,
Sure.
and we can get the audience to get a glimpse of, because actually the interludes are different. They're in a I wouldn't even call it a voice, but you know, they're in a different voice. It's a different sort of
Yes.
narrative style that you have there. They're very poetic. They're kind of like fables, right? I
Yes.
mean, they
Yes.
reminded me, not, you know, you can't read Farsi very easily, so, but they instantly took me to Persian fables and myths and our
Yeah.
poems, and they were extraordinary. So if you'd like to,
Sure. Which one would you?
should we read Sisters, which I think is
Sure.
what opens
Of
the interlude
course.
that opens the book, or your excerpt of it, and then perhaps you can elaborate a little bit on how they came to be.
Okay, so this is the first interlude. Originally, I called them fairy tales because I didn't know what else to call them, and they are different. This one is really basically an explanation of what happens between the sisters and in this family of the two main characters, the sister and the father and mother. And so this is how it starts. In the time of our history, when the songwriter who imagined was murdered in New York and the dictator Saddam invaded Iran, there was a girl who wanted to be as free as a boy in choosing her future. Her father, however, cared only that she marry a suitable man. Her mother wanted peace all around. Despite his relentless nagging, the daughter refused an audience to any suitors who inquired. Soon it came to pass that the girl's younger sister, who was demure and obedient, and to whom the elder sister was supremely devoted, fell in love with a suitable young man of her own and wanted to marry. The father, recognizing this as an auspicious opportunity, pronounced that he would allow the marriage of his younger daughter only when the elder daughter consented to marry as well. Much to everyone's surprise, the elder daughter swiftly and dispassionately chose the next suitor in line. With great aplomb, the father sent invitations far and wide for a grand double wedding, at which point the elder daughter secretly visited a surgeon and had herself made barren, and therefore unmarriageable. The father, apoplectic with rage and determined not to lose face entirely, allowed the younger daughter to marry, but he disowned the elder one, who happily moved far away to pursue her desires.
Thank you. So beautiful.
Thank you.
And yes, so in that one, you've told the backstory, and I suppose they have this function where they encompass a little bit of story, but tell us more about how they came about.
They came about very late in the process, and I think, and I'm not exactly sure, you know, most of my writing is very tedious and it's a struggle. It takes me a long time and a lot of words to get to the point where I'm satisfied and where the structure works, or even the words work. But these interludes came somehow to help me, I think, they almost came, it felt like they came from somewhere else. I don't believe in all that, oh, the characters speak to me and blah, blah, blah. I think it's writing fiction is very hard, and it's craft intensive, and I'm not being told what to write from some muse. But in this case, with these interludes, they helped me tie things together and to set things in history, not just my history, but the history of anybody who might be reading the book. So, you know, when I say in the year that the songwriter who imagined, I'm talking about John Lennon. So I'm setting people, you know, in that time so they can relate, because otherwise, how are we going to understand each other if we can't relate on a personal level? And so then the rest of the interludes came to me. Some of them are a lot less telling and more about ethereal things, I guess. Later, you know, when I'm writing about Zoya, who is the daughter of a writer in Iran who is imprisoned by the regime, her interlude about her relate more to the general difficulties that writers have, and how autocracy silence us in order to, just in the same way that women are silenced in families often, in order to protect the patriarchy. Yeah. So.
It's interesting that you say that, because actually I was thinking also that your portrait of this family, in the way that we kind of set it within Iranian history and our humanity, I suppose, as well. You have, of course, this family. There were two daughters, one dies, and the story happens around the 1-year commemoration of her death, when the family comes back together. Now Yusuf is the head of the family. He is the patriarch, you know, the father. And he is an interesting figure, because of course you make him this patriarch, and he is quite authoritarian. And it seems to me that you're also telling us, or showing us, perhaps, I don't know, I'm going to ask you, through this family, how, if we want to examine the systems that govern us, authoritarianism, patriarchy, these oppressive systems that are very present in this book, in terms of their effect on the characters and their lives, that actually dismantling these systems starts small. It starts individually. It starts within the family. And I have a line that you write quite towards the end about Yusuf, where he examines himself, and he says he'd clung so dearly to his authoritative image that he'd failed to protect and nurture his own children, which is a huge realization and understanding for him. Can you speak to that a little bit? How we have those systems reflected in the story of the family, and how the family learns about themselves?
I think that the family is where it all starts. And especially if the family is extended, and you know, in Iranian culture, we put great importance on the extended family, whereas in Western culture, we're more focused on the nuclear family. That's a different topic, but I think that even in the nuclear family, we have a system of patriarchy. And I think that this is then, you know, it bursts outward, so that ultimately we have societies and governments that follow these same patriarchal rules. Obviously in Iran and in America and in Europe, we have this. It's the dominant system. But it's the way to change it, in my opinion, is the people within the system need to have examples of what it can be otherwise. And, you know, sometimes tragedy forces people to examine, and in Yusuf's case, the tragedy of the death of his daughter and grandchildren, and then the realization that he did not protect his daughters in the way he thought he was protecting them is, I mean, the tragedy led him to understand that, but he couldn't seem to imagine that he could be any different. And until this tragedy occurred. And if we could examine that and have more examples of that, then it can reshape the family and ultimately then reshape the way all of our systems work, including certain governments, etc. I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
Absolutely. And I think it's really fascinating. And within that idea of that we need examples and we need to be able to imagine different systems. There's a lot I want to say about that. Initially, I want to come to what's happening in Iran through that, actually.
Yes.
But I wanted to also talk, before we go there, quickly about Shireen, who is the mother of the family. And she is Shireen. She is sweet. That is what her name means. And that is what she is. She's a lovely, rather self-sacrificing lady. And she also has a very interesting journey of evolution and growth through this book. So would you like to read us a little bit about Shireen, Susanne, John? I wonder whether you want to, that we've got two potential readings for her. Do you want to read the one where she's really reflecting on her role and her future, perhaps?
Sure.
Whichever one you think is more relevant, actually. But that's, okay. I thought that was such an interesting dilemma.
So I'll read the one where she is thinking about, this is much later in the book, and she actually, you know, you had mentioned another section where she's talking with her sister Golnaz.
Yes.
And I'll read that first just because I think, let's see, I think it will give an even broader picture of women of that certain age who grew up in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in Iran. So Shireen is thinking about, actually, this is something that she's thinking about. She's in San Francisco. She's left her husband to come and visit her eldest daughter, who is now her only daughter. And she's trying to figure out what she is going to do with her life. And she's taking a walk and she's thinking about things that her sister, who's a few years younger than her and therefore experienced, you know, growing up in Iran a little differently because Shireen had a more traditional upbringing, just being a few years younger, and Goli a much more modern upbringing. So this is Shireen thinking, just yesterday, Goli had said, a person has to give herself permission to let go. She'd given herself as an example, Goli had, admitting in a sad voice that she wished she'd never gone on the trip to Iran. Goli had recently gone back, and this is 1998. Her memories were ruined. Even the streets had been unfamiliar. She'd gotten lost a few times. The language had changed. In just 20 years, words and phrases had been erased and replaced with new ones, slang she'd never heard. And her mannerisms and gestures were outdated. People easily knew she was one of those who had fled. She'd felt like a foreigner in her own country. She'd had to let go. Shireen reminded her that they were already foreigners in the United States. And then Goli said, sister, we are Americans, all of us from an elsewhere that only exists in memory. And then a little bit later, Shireen has some other thoughts. Here we go. Here, she's thinking, for Shireen, it was so hard to figure out what she wanted without considering everyone else. She couldn't seem to separate her desires from what was best for the others. She didn't know her own mind. She'd been raised to accept the duty of self-sacrifice. Just by watching, she understood that a woman's life belonged to others. Even among the housewives of America who thought themselves so free, this was true. in their hearts, they belong to others. And perhaps it was not such a terrible thing. Perhaps it was simply the natural way of humans. And perhaps it was unfair to expect to change this about herself so late in life. And I won't tell you what she decides, so it won't ruin the story. I hope that gives a sort of sense. It's really hard to read, small portions of a book, but a sense of her anyway. I mean, she turned out to be my surprise character, and the one I really enjoyed writing ultimately in the end.
I feel that you get a sense of that, because she really, they're all very beautifully fleshed out, but Shirin is so beautifully fleshed out, and her journey is so it's so wonderfully, well, I suppose for all of us with Iranian mums, it's so relatable. And through her, we see so much that perhaps isn't really known about Iran. Just the very fact that you mentioned the difference in upbringing between her and her younger sister, because of how quick the changes were in Iran at that time. You really, through Shirin and through her sister Gulnaz, we see about, that moment in Iran where, under the Shah, where there was modernity happening, and it happened so fast that the 4 years that separated these sisters meant that they had completely different expectations, upbringings. And Shirin comes to America, and again, I think this is interesting. And at some point, someone tells her, I think, that actually, in fact, it was Gulnaz, as you said, who says, you're living in an Iran of 50 years ago, essentially, as often people in the diaspora do, because of course, Iran continues to develop, but Shirin comes with her upbringing from that period, and that's where she stays. So for her particularly, after 40 years of living in the US, but within the bubble of this tradition, this journey is very tenderly told, I think. This journey for her to find herself. This idea, of women and their roles, Susanne June, of course, is at the heart, I think, also of this book, isn't it? And a little bit at the heart of the struggle that we've seen, not just, in Iran now, that has been going on for a long time, really. And we have a sort of an extreme rejection of that in your character of Mitra, who actually is an independent and free woman, even from childhood, but in order to have that freedom and that independence inside this traditional family, being held by this, very controlling patriarch, she essentially, she does voluntary sterilization, right? So she essentially unsexes herself. And I thought it was interesting also that often she's referred to in the book by other characters as being very masculine, and being free. Wrote it down. Free. There she is. She was free as a boy. She wanted to be, a girl who wanted to be as free as a boy and choosing her future.
Yes, yes.
At the same time, her sister, who is dead when the novel starts, but is woven into it because she's woven into Mitra, is the opposite. She's soft, she's submissive, she's obedient. So you have these polar extremes. Tell us a little bit how you wanted to examine.
So I know, for me, I wanted to examine these opposite types of women, but in essence, they both rebel in their own ways. Mitra is very outwardly rebellious, whereas Anahita is very privately rebellious. It doesn't, either way is fine with me. I mean, everybody has to, like I said, you have to have an imagination. Even the idea of the family, we have to be able to imagine a different kind of family, a different system in order to, I mean, just abandoning this patriarchal system doesn't mean abandoning the idea of family, because we need a family. to survive as a human race, and family, tribe, clan, what have you. So I think that for me, Mitra and Anahita are, and for me, character moves plot. So character is so important. They have to be, for me, realistic. I can't have, Mitra is flawed in many ways, and so is Anahita, but they change over time, just like people do. And I wanted to figure out how each of them could have fulfillment to an extent, and independence and self-determination. Of course, that doesn't get wrapped up in a bow ever in real life. But hopefully I achieved that, and showed that it's possible for everyone, including Shireen, including Youssef, and any of the others. So.
And yes, thank you. You did. And I sort of also like the kind of messiness of it. As you said, it doesn't get tied up in a bow, and you didn't do that, and I thought that was also courageous. And I wonder if there was, if you had to resist an urge, to.
I did not have to resist an urge. And the romantic part of the book, between Mitra and Julia, I did not have to resist the urge to wrap things up, but I did have to resist the publishing industry. So one of the reasons it took a while to sell this book was because, publishers are not always very imaginative. They're business people. They look for what works, so what has worked in the past. And they wanted a Hollywood ending, and I was not interested in giving that. And I'm so happy that the publisher who finally bought the book and the editor understood that about this book and didn't press me on that. So
that's fascinating. Can we talk a little bit actually about that journey and the writing process, because and the being published process, because of course, as we are all in this age of sort of multiculturalism and diversity, we want to learn more about each other. Sometimes the gatekeepers to that kind of thing are the publishers, right? Because they decide what is going to get, what the reading public actually has at their disposal to read. Yes. So tell me about how this book was. I know that you had a long process, so I'm interested to know.
Okay, so I started this book in 2006. And I finished it at the end of 2016. So 10 years, and many, many, many versions, and many, many, many pages, sometimes written from different points of view of the characters. A lot was removed and is sitting somewhere in a drawer. And then it took me 5 years to sell it. And that meant I had to do a lot of more editing and more revision. It was a really long process. And, the issue of being, Iranian American, publishers are, oh yes, we'll have our one Iranian American writer, or, in a year, we'll publish one Iranian American book a year from one Iranian American author. This sort of categorization, and it's, yes, I understand the business has to be like this to a certain extent, but we in Iran, as we know, we're as diverse a nation or a culture as America is, maybe even more diverse. I mean, you are part Kurdish, and what's happening in Iran right now is happening mostly in Kurdistan. And so I think that it's, I want people in the larger world to understand this and to see how similar we can all be. And also to be aware that the fights we have as women for independence and self-determination are everywhere, because this is the dominant system, and we can learn from each other, but we have to be open to being aware so that we can bring those lessons that we learn from other societies to our local. I mean, what's happening in the United States, for example, with Roe v. Wade, and with having had somebody like Trump and these people in power right now who are trying to slash women's rights. This is the same fight that Iranian women are fighting for now. And we have to be aware and engage and make others aware and learn from each other and help each other. It's a fight that will never end, but if we don't pay attention, we'll just keep losing more of it. I'm sorry, I'm being pedantic now.
You're not at all. I completely agree. And I'm sure that, you know, everyone does. And I think this idea of, you know, what are we even given to read? You know, who are the gatekeepers? Who are controlling those systems? I told you this before about the Cyprus tree. Had lots of lovely comments from American editors, but it was never published in America because exactly of that. They cited 3 other Iranian writers who had written memoirs. They were all that had been published actually over a span of about 30 years.
Right.
And they said, because these 3 books exist, we can't see how there would be a market for Kamin's book. And you just think, well, but you're not giving anybody I'm not talking about my book, but genuinely, the less diversity there is, the less opportunity we have to understand each other.
No, I agree with you. And I think when we talk about gatekeepers, we have to remember that, yes, there are gatekeepers, but the power everyone has to buy books, okay, or to talk about books, to read more books and watch more film, and, you know, not what the gatekeepers want us to watch, but to really just, you know, share a book with a friend and say, this is interesting. I mean, we are responsible for what's inside us. Why allow the gatekeepers to, you know, the news organizations, the publishers, the politicians, why allow them to occupy so much of this?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
The colonization, you know.
Yeah, it's true. That's a great word.
Right, absolutely right. So we all have the responsibility to look around a little bit as there is some information. I wanted actually, apropos of, you know, we're talking, of course, about our beloved country and the terrible things that are happening there. I wanted just to show the audience as well how cleverly your book, actually, before we go there, I wanted to say it's set in 1998, yes, right? And I wanted to ask you about that. Why did you choose for it to be in that time period?
For me, I usually need about 20 years. I don't like to write about what's happening. I don't think I have enough information or perspective to write about what's happening right now. And so I think it took me about 10 years to digest what was happening in 1998. And 1998 was pivotal because Khatami was, you know, there was hope, the reform movement, all of that. And then at the same time, there were the chain murders, which was the murder, the hardliners murdering journalists and writers and intellectuals. So and it was the cusp of 9/11. So this was an important time for me, I thought. And I can't really explain other than that. For me, it was just a good time to write about.
Yeah, and it's very much in that rooted there. And you know what? I've been reading my old diaries from that time recently, you know, reflecting on everything that's happening. And actually, it is really interesting. You capture that time very well because there was a lot of hope. Iran was absolutely, as you say somewhere, the economy was booming, even though everything was illegal. You know? I loved that. I loved how you pointed out both our societies are capitalist, Iranians and Americans very alike. Right. Systems really reflect each other. You know, something I've always said, you know, Iran and America is kind of like a love story that went sour. You know?
Yes, no question.
Right. But looking back at that time and wondering how we got to here, because actually also in Iran, that was a very different time to right now. There was more hope. There was a bit less maybe casual violence. I don't know, but I thought this was really interesting because actually, I'd love for you to read out this little section that happens, you know, between Mitra and Sally. Yeah. Because I think it leads us really well into what's going on today.
Yeah, this, I wrote this many years ago, and so it will show that what's happening in Iran now has been going on for a very long time. So Mitra is the main character. She's around 40 years old. And Salime, otherwise known as Sally, is a young refugee. She's around 16 years old, and she is in the United States. And she comes from a village, not, not a very educated or really any educated background. And she's striving to become American and to live here. So they're having this conversation in the car, and Mitra is speaking in English because Sally is learning English, and Sally speaks back to her in Farsi, just so you know, accent-wise what's happening. And Sally asks Mitra if she believes in God. And Mitra says, I believe we all belong to a larger thing. If you wish, you can call it God, but God is different from religion. Salime nodded again. It has lots of rules, and the mullahs change them all the time. People don't like them, the prayer singers. They're big-headed and mean. I'm glad there aren't any in America. Mitra chuckled. Mullahs are everywhere, Sally. Some of them are good and don't bother anyone. They help and comfort people. The priests and ministers and lamas and gurus and rabbis. Sally was concentrating on the English words. I'll teach you about these mullahs of other religions. Some of them are bad and mean, like you said, just like some ordinary people are. They think they know what's best for everyone, or they only care about what's best for themselves. And if you give them power over you, they will use it. Mitra turned the car off and unbuckled her seatbelt, but Salima didn't move. So we have to fight the prayer singers, right, Mitra Khanum? Everyone says just ignore them, find a way around them, but don't fight. People are tired of fighting, first in the revolution and then in the war. Mitra wished her father could hear these words. He and his friends thought Iranians needed just a little nudge and some American military support to rise up and make another revolution. She smiled at Salime. Fighting is good, but little by little maybe, so not too many people get hurt. Salima says, back in my village, I have a friend whose parents sent her to school in Shiraz, and she wears her scarf way back on her head, so her hair falls over her forehead. I think this is a little by little fight, Mitra Khanum, don't you? Yes, I do. Mitra reached over and lightly grabbed Sadima's ponytail. And maybe one day, all your friends and all the girls your age will take their scarves off like you have and wear their hair like you do. And if every girl does it, the police won't be able to stop them all at once, little by little. So, I mean, we've been thinking about doing this for centuries.
I mean, you know, Susanne, John, that really moves me, and it kind of makes me shiver, right? Because
yeah, I know. It made me shiver after the protest started, and I was like, I wrote that? Wait a minute.
Right.
But
did I make...
it's not predictive. It's just the way it was and has been for so long.
Yeah. And, you know, exactly in that time, as you say, I was in Iran, you know, late 90s, early 2000s. And I used to say this, we all used to say this, you know, look how much it's changing. But surely if one day all the women took their headscarves off, did you think that this would happen now? What's happening in Iran?
No, there is no way to predict. You know, when people ask me, oh, you know, this is so timely. And I'm like, you know, the truth is it's been happening continuously. I remember watching a video when I was trying to create Zoya's character. She's the Iranian refugee who comes from an educated background. And I found a video online, and this had to have been 6 or 7 years ago. I found a video online of a young woman walking in the street in Tehran, wearing her headscarf as a ponytail holder. And then this woman who was part of the, Sisters of Zainab or morality
Yes,
police,
sure,
old
yeah.
woman from a village sees her and is screeching and following her so that she can catch her and, make her put her scarf on, which is, this woman's mission. And the young woman turns around in the street and shoves this woman away from her. It was so brave, so brave. So, what's happening now has happened. It's just reaching, hopefully, more ears, more eyes, and it needs to reach more. And I really, really want people who are not necessarily Iranian to become aware of this and do whatever they can to spread this word, what's going on, and help. Anyway.
I agree. I agree. I totally agree with you. And the bravery is unimaginable. And also it speaks of, I wonder whether you felt this when I saw girls, doing what they did after Gina Amini's death. I thought, but this is for all of us. This is for our mothers. It's for our grandmothers. It's for their mothers before them. It's for 43 years of the Iranian people taking abuse at the hands of this regime, but it's also for hundreds of years of Iranian women, because you hear that in the voices of the girls as they're shouting, they can't take anymore. They're very young. So that what they're carrying, right? Do you feel that this kind of?
I feel a desperation.
Yeah.
And I think that when you're that young, you also are more courageous because that's just the way young people are. They feel immortal to an extent. I've been talking to some people or friends who have parents back in Iran, and I've heard that even the elderly are going out. And of course they can't protest in the same way. And of course it's much worse in the provinces and in Kurdistan especially. But they need our support, and they're getting killed every day and raped and imprisoned, and it's just we have to turn the tide of the men and the collusive women who are participating and doing the bidding of these men of the clergy. And the only way to do that is to put pressure as much as we can. And that pressure has to be then taken. The people in Iran are ruling this revolution, not us outside. It's not from outside. Anytime it comes from outside, it doesn't work. It has to happen from within.
Absolutely. And we've seen that even with the Shah's reforms. He was not from outside, but he was trying to make these reforms from top down, and it was too fast. I mean, that's a simplistic way of looking, but that's also the case, right? So I agree. I also try and say to people, this has to happen in Iran. It has to come out of the Iranians. Two things. I think we're running out of time, which is really annoying. I'm sorry.
There's so much to talk about.
There's so much to talk about.
To accept that there are some things we won't get to.
Well, but before, I'm going to stubbornly say, before we go there, I just wanted to say two things. One, I think one of the things that you said earlier about changing even the structure of the family, we have to be able to imagine a different way, which is something you've examined in this book. I wonder if I feel this also with what's happening in Iran now, Susanne June. When I see those kids building bonfires, and in Kurdistan, I see a lot of the videos, people as well as being shot in protest, they're dancing. They're dancing in the street around fires. They're caring and loving each other. They're taking care of each other. People are opening their homes and protecting strangers. And in a way, I feel that this is the alternative. it's not enough to say we don't want that. We have to be able to say this is what we want. And have you noticed and felt that too, that around the edges of the, with what we can see from out here, I can see that there's an alternative reality that's being presented and lived. That's what makes me hopeful.
Yes, I do think that. I mean, I think that it's important to focus on the executions and what the government is doing and how awful they are. But, you know, what we need to also do is to be able to imagine what it can change to, and what the young people and the whole society is willing to change it to. You know, it's very hard to have political organization in Iran right now, and I don't think the diaspora should be organizing politically for Iranians in any way. We are just supposed to be supportive and spread the word. But you're absolutely right. We have to look at what these people, men and women, boys and girls, how they are living and what kind of a life they want, instead of what they are being forced to live. So I agree with you. That I'm so glad you brought that up.
Thank you. And before I hand you over back to Omar for questions, I think it would be lovely to finish with a little clip of your interlude on Zoya, because I think that she is the new generation and she is the precursor of what's happening right now, and it'll lead us, hopefully.
Yes, sure. I love Zoya. In fact, my hope is to continue her story in my next book, if I can ever get back to writing. So let me see. This is Zoya's interlude. It's just after she learns, she goes home and she sees that her father has been taken by the intelligence services. I mean, he's disappeared, and she realizes she's in danger and she needs to leave. Her father was a writer. She's around 20 years old. She wandered toward the university, where now she knew the spies and informants of the shadow theocracy lurked and blended and set traps for the thinkers. She stood hidden on the periphery. Silently, she bade farewell to the professor, who loved Kundera and Kobol, the light-eyed poet who came from Tabriz, and the sisters who swooned over Metallica in the hallways. She turned her back on the place where she had once belonged, where her poetry lived in pixels poised to fly on the wings of code. And she remembered what all the children of writers begin to sense from the moment their eyes see the light of the world, that in all of our histories, in the East and the West, in the North and the South, the writers have been hunted and silenced by the cowards who seek power. And I'm not just talking about Iran there. I can't help the dig.
It's sadly universal.
Universal. Yes.
Oh, thank you so much, Susanne. You know, because I love that, you know, the idea of her poems being written, you know, in code, and because this is, of course, what is giving some of the power to this younger generation, who would be the children of the Zoyas.
That's right. That's right.
Is the fact that they're so savvy in cyberspace, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to hand you over to Omar. I think I've completely taken all the time, but I do know there's a couple of questions which I tried to avoid. So Omar, over to you.
Okay. Kamin June, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. Thank you. Hi, Omar. We couldn't stop talking. We can't help it. We're crazy about each other.
It was wonderful. It was really wonderful. Yeah, we have a couple of questions. The first question, not sure if it's a personal question, but someone asked, how did Susanne's upbringing with an Iranian father affect the theme of the book? And we could also expand it to other, you know, paternal male figures in your life.
Sure. You know, my father's still alive. He's 99. He just turned 99. And I think he's probably watching. I don't know. But he's nothing like this. I shouldn't say he's nothing like this character. You know, patriarchy is very embedded in the Iranian family. And my grandfather was a very strict patriarch, and I watched how he raised his children. And my father is, yes, a patriarch, but my father married an American woman who was born and raised in the Bronx, from a completely different social background, religious background. And he emigrated to the United States in 1950. So even though I lived both in Iran and here, you know, my father is very savvy, and over time has changed in so very many ways. And from the start was kind of a rebel himself. The fact that he came to the United States, he's very much like my main character, Mitra. You know, she's, as her mother says, you're just like your father. So I think that, yes, you extrapolate from your own family and your own life, but fiction is fiction. It is from the imagination. And if we read more of it, then we would become aware of how our imaginations can work. So, sure, a long answer, sorry.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, and we'll close out with this question. What are the key lessons from your book for those of us who are non-immigrants or non-Iranians?
The key questions?
Lessons.
Lessons. Oh, lessons. You know, it's sort of a tired, people are getting tired of hearing this, but you know, the United States is a country of immigrants. And if you try to shun those immigrants and you don't allow them to come in, you will not have America anymore. I mean, I hate to be that blunt, but I was born and raised here, so I'm going to be that blunt. We need more immigrants. We don't have enough workers. We don't have enough educated workers. We don't have a society that is moving forward at the pace it should move. So that's the lesson. And also, I guess I mean, I don't want to seem combative about this, but the question is, I'm trying to understand what the questioner really wants to know. The lessons are, we're all mixed. You know, non-immigrants are still immigrants somewhere in their past. So look in the past. So anyway, that's, I think, the lesson. Maybe.
Yes, thank you. It makes me think of my own experience, as I've been born in Puerto Rico. I grew up right here in Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
So very much love both places, and I have a childhood love of the United Kingdom. So I feel at home in all three places.
Yeah, and that's okay. We keep trying to categorize ourselves and put ourselves in these little boxes. No, it's okay to be multi anything. You know, that's what will make us a more peaceful human race. You know?
Exactly. Well, this has been a really amazing program. Thank you so much, Susanne. Thank you so much, Kamin.
Oh, thank you for inviting me and for tapping Kamin to be my conversation partner. And you know, please, everybody who happens to be here, please support the Mark Twain House Museum.
Thank you so much. And thank you all of you out there in the audience for joining us. If you want to buy Suzanne's novel, you can do so through our museum store. We put a few links in the chat, but you can also go to our website and go up to the little tab that says shop, and it'll be in there. And I just wanted to let you know about a couple of upcoming virtual programs. State on Freedom, which tells the history of Black liberation through the intertwined story of two grassroots organizers, will be on Tuesday, January 31st. and also known as the federal holiday of my mother's birthday, the January 31st.
My husband's birthday too.
Oh, awesome. And Life on Delay with John Hendrickson and Clint Smith, both of who write for The Atlantic. Clint Smith is very well known. So this book, Life on Delay, will be about John Hendrickson's lifelong struggle to speak. And that program will be on Thursday, February 2nd. So that is all from me. Thanks again, Susanne and Kamin.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
Have a
much.
good day, Susanne, and a good night, Kamin.
I'll be
Okay.
taking an aperitivo. Thanks, you guys.
Yes.
And Susanne Jun.
Talk to you soon. Korbunetera.
Hachi
Bye,
Zokia.
everyone.
Okay. Bye, Omar. Thank you.
Bye.